Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Barry Pavel. I'm the director of the Brent Scowcroft Center here at the Atlantic Council. It's really an honor to welcome General Robert Neller, the Marine Corps' 37th Commandant, here for an event that's part of our Commander Series. We proudly host this series with our partners, Saab North America. And in a moment, I will call up Mike Anderson, the company's CEO and a friend of mine, to introduce the General. But first, I wanted to say just a few words about the series and offer a couple of thoughts on leading the Marine Corps in just such a turbulent time like we're seeing today. The Council, and particularly the Scowcroft Center, could not be prouder of the Commander Series and what we've accomplished with Saab in the last 2 years. We've hosted a number of commanders and generals. Most recently, I was on this stage with Admiral Rogers of Cybercom and NSA, and boy, was that a great conversation. I'd really highly recommend looking at the video. It was a really refreshing and open conversation. We also have had General Welsh here, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Admiral Gortney of Northcom, Admiral Haney of Stratcom, General Austin on stage here with a friend of mine, Jake Tapper of CNN. That was a very good discussion as well, and many more. And so we really think the Commander Series is just the premier platform for military and defense leaders to discuss the strategic imperatives of their command, which is changing by the month, it seems, and how they plan to meet their objectives amidst all this dynamism. So I am glad that we have the Commander Series so we can host General Neller today. He will speak to us about the Marine Corps going forward, further into the 21st century. And with that, I would like to pass the floor over to Mike Anderson, Saab North America's president and CEO. Before I do that, please note that today's event is on the record. We will be live tweeting this session from our @AC Scowcroft account. I will be doing that, and also using the hashtag AC Defense. Thank you again, all of you, for being here. And now, Mike, I'd like to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you all for being here today on such a chilly day. Believe it or not, this is the 8th year we run this program, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces today here as well. Again, my name is Michael Anderson, President and CEO of Saab North America. For almost 80 years, Saab has been at the forefront of technology and innovation, and designing and manufacturing products to enhance and enable national defense to increase the safety and security of the public. During that time, we have grown from a company entirely focused on producing fighter aircraft for the Swedish Air Force to a global provider of security and defense solutions. During that time, we have also been very actively promoting not only close and robust US and Swedish bilateral relationship, but also strong ties between Europe and the United States in general. As a global defense and security company, responsibility and commitment towards people, society are fundamental to us. And we strongly believe that continuing to build upon the already strong relationships established between our respective nations is essential in order to ensure our ability to promote a stable and secure future. Looking at the global security situation around the world today, this effort is clearly more important than ever. This is also why our support to the Atlantic Council and our partnership to run the Commander Series are so valuable and important to us. Today, I'm very honored to introduce General Neller as the speaker on the Commander Series. General Neller assumed his current position as Commandant of the Marine Corps in September 2015. Prior to assuming his current role, he served as the Commander, Marine Forces Command, and Commander, Marine Forces Central Command. A native of East Lansing, Michigan, and also Red Wings fans, I just learned. He graduated from the University of Virginia and was commissioned in May 1975. During his career, General Neller has served as an infantry officer at all levels. He commanded the Marine Security Force Company Panama during Operations Just Cause and Promote Liberty. He also commanded a light armored infantry battalion during Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, just to name a few. General Neller has also served as Deputy Commanding General 1, a Marine Expeditionary Force during Operation Iraqi Freedom during 2005 and 2007, Assistant Division Commander for 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions, and President of the Marine Corps University. His joint assignments include service in the Policy Division of Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe in Cousteau, Belgium, and as the Director of Operations of the Joint Staff in Washington, D.C. General Neller is a graduate of the Advanced Armor Officer course, the Marine Corps Command and Staff College, the Naval Defense College, and the Armed Forces Staff College. He also holds a master's degree in Human Resource Management from Pepperdine University. These are just a few highlights from General Neller's long career and distinguished service to the United States. General, we're very grateful that you're here today. Take some time out of your busy schedule, and we're looking forward to discuss and hear from you the U.S. Marine Corps' priorities and challenges now and into the future. Please join me in welcoming General Neller to the stage.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. It's a little chilly outside, but just keep in mind that there's about 2,000 Marines and coalition forces in Norway living in this stuff. And it's snowing. I checked the weather. I thought it'd be a little colder, but it's about the same temp. Yesterday they did snowshoe march. Sounds familiar, like Back to the Future. So I appreciate the Atlantic Council inviting me to speak here today. I'll make some comments and then I guess we'll have some questions and discussion. So, as was mentioned, today's security environment is complicated, it's dangerous, and sadly doesn't appear to be getting a whole lot better. Last year, Secretary Kissinger told the Senate Armed Services Committee that the United States has not faced a more diverse and complex array of crises since the end of the Second World War. And looking around the world, you kind of have to agree. The Syrian civil war, since fifth year, continues to destabilize the Middle East, and it resolves to threaten regional security and stability. China's rapid military modernization, coupled with their behavior in the South and East China Seas, is raising tensions and kind of complicates the security environment. Meanwhile, we remain occupied fighting wars that we were hoping to end and responding to crisis around the world. In the meantime, our potential adversaries have been rebuilding or building military capabilities, many of which now equal and in some cases exceed our own. In short, as Secretary of Defense Carter said last week, we have to think and do a lot of different things about a lot of challenges, and at the same time, we don't have the luxury of just one opponent or choice between current fights or future fights. With that in mind, we Marines have our work cut out for us, or from a business perspective, there's great potential out there for us as a nation's force in readiness and a crisis response force. And not that we're looking for a fight, but we have to be prepared for one. As our nation's force in readiness, we are mandated by Congress to be most ready when the nation is least ready, and that means being ready to deploy at a moment's notice in defense of our national interests. It also means being prepared for operations across the range of military operations. That said, we believe tomorrow's fight, whenever it comes, will be different than what we've been doing the past 15 years as we've experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan. We believe it'll include conflict across 5 domains: land, air, sea, cyber, and space. Information ops, operations across the electromagnetic spectrum will be more important. We've got a generation of Marines that have grown up assuming that the electromagnetic spectrum would be there for them, that they would turn on their gear and it would work 100% of the time and it would be accurate. We're going to have to teach them they're going to have to fight for that information. They're going to have to fight to get access to the spectrum. And tomorrow's conflicts will involve rapidly changing and evolving technologies and concepts. And I believe the potential for casualties because of the kinetic capability of these weapons is likely to go up. As many of you are probably aware, the Atlantic Council has partnered with the Marine Corps Combat Development Command and our Warfighting Lab on 2 projects this month: a forecasting workshop to explore how writing and storytelling can help us better understand future conflict, and an innovation symposium that will inform our Force Development 25 effort. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Mr. August Cole and the larger Atlantic Council for their partnership in this front. Imagining future wars, challenges, and opportunities. And I just took a brief this morning talking about this. You know, we know that there are capabilities and skill sets in the Marines that we think we're going to need in the future and that we don't have, and we're trying to figure out what those are, how many and how much that is, and what we may have to give up to trade to get those capabilities. So it's going to affect how we recruit, how we organize, how we train, how we equip the force. Before, the question was, how do we do what we do better? Now the second question is, how do we do what we do different? About 3 weeks ago, we released Frago Number 1, which is the guidance from me as the commandant to the fleet, or to the operational force, or to the entire Marine Corps. It was called Frago Number 1 because it built on what former Commandant General Dunford, now our chairman, wrote in his planning guidance, because that guidance was still valid, and it only was less than a year old. It addresses 5 areas that I believe are most critical to our success on tomorrow's battlefield. I'm not going to talk about each one in a lot of detail, but I do want to highlight a few things that I think may be relevant to today's discussion. The first topic or bin was people. The quality of our individual Marine today has never been higher. We're recruiting exceptionally talented young Americans, and we'll need to continue attracting America's best and brightest into the future. Just some statistics. Normally you go into the beginning of the fiscal year having a certain amount of the force already recruited for that year. We started this year, we already had 55% of the Marines that we needed to enlist this year in the pool. Right now there's 2 or 3 young men or women for every spot we have that want to be Marine officers. This year, normally in the past, we've taken about 16% of the graduating class of each Naval Academy. This year we got 23%. So obviously there is some desire and motivation to serve their nation, to serve our nation as a U.S. Marine. And we have to sustain that because the quality of these individuals is as high as it's ever been. And the reason for that is because tomorrow's battlefields will be more fluid, more complex, more ambiguous. And we anticipate that operations will be more distributed, requiring junior leaders to execute with greater autonomy and with minimal guidance. Therefore, we must continue to recruit and retain Marines who are smart, fit, disciplined, resilient, and able to adapt to uncertainty and the unknown. People who can solve problems. This is our friendly center of gravity. This is the thing we have to protect, and it's our highest priority. Our success on tomorrow's battlefield will depend on many things, but it will depend most on the capability and the skills and knowledge and intellect of the Marines that we have fighting that fight. The second area is readiness. As a force in readiness, it's critical to our identity that we are ready. We're mandated by Congress to serve as the nation's force in readiness, meaning that our bags are always packed, Marines are ready to go, and our gear is prepared, and we have to be able to fight when we get where we get. Our focus on preparedness in many ways defines who we are and what we do. The fiscal situation of the past few years has affected our readiness. Resources have diminished because of sequestration, and even though we're glad that there was a bipartisan budget agreement, number 2 this year, we've been forced to prioritize near-term readiness of those forces that are deploying or are deployed to the next units that are in the chute. And this has created some risk. Many of our home station units, or as we say, the bench, lack certain resources to meet necessary training and equipment readiness levels. And while these forces are waiting to deploy or may not be in a regular rotation, they're part of those forces that would be called forward as part of a Marine Air Ground Task Force if there were a major conflict, and they're critical to our success. We'll continue to prioritize the readiness of our forward deployed forces and our next to deploy units over these units that are further down the queue. However, to meet our congressional mandate and expectations of the American people, we require a ready bench that's ready to deploy with minimal notice. I want to talk a moment here in one area of readiness that's of particular concern, and that's for aviation. We're at a critical point as we go through basically the transition of every model type series of airplane that we have. And this is a big deal, is it will ultimately dramatically improve our warfighting capabilities over the long term, but it does come with some short-term risk. It takes a Marine squadron, whether they're a fixed wing or a rotary wing or a tilt rotor wing or squadron, approximately about 2 years once they go from an old aircraft to a newer aircraft to kind of get their combat capability and everybody transition, not just the air crew, but the maintainers and the part support to rebuild this capability. So while we modernize, these squadrons are off to the side, and so we have fewer squadrons which we can call on and available for tasking. Adding to this fact is the number of squadrons we have are a little bit smaller than we did back in 2003. While the combatant commander's demand for Marine forces, to include aviation, is not going any less. So we're working through that, and fielding F-35C or F-35B and Cs is part of that. Getting the 53K is we've got two experimental versions flying now. So we're watching this very closely. And as the infantry officer, I know this scares all my aviation brothers out there that they got to grunt watching the aviation thing, but I spend a lot of time looking at airplanes. A third area of focus relates to training, simulation, experimentation. We're evolving our approach to training. In some ways, we're going back to the future, emphasizing core capabilities that atrophied at least somewhat over the past few years doing counterinsurgency in Iraq or Afghanistan. We're going to go renew our focus on things like attack, defend, combined arms, maneuver, night operations, camouflage, deception, operations in a degraded command and control environment. And we'll also renew our emphasis on expeditionary exercises and being part of the naval force. At the same time, we're looking forward to capitalizing on emerging technologies and creating and expanding virtual training operations that are part of our identity. The Marine Corps is first and foremost, I lost my place. So the technology's there, but we're not, I don't believe, fully using it to our potential. We want to increase the amount and quality of training for individual leaders, from squad leaders to division commanders. I think we can better leverage technology to increase repetitions. Training's about repetitions. Muscle memory, doing it over, making a decision, whether it's pulling the trigger, turning on the radio, fixing this, or making a decision. We need to increase our reps in mentally and physically demanding environments so that when Marines get to the stress of combat, they can make the right call. In all this training, all of our exercises will be focused on building our maritime operational capabilities and testing new operational concepts and technologies. We already invest significant energy and resources in an aggressive exercise regimen. What we're going to do is use these exercises as laboratories for experimentations. And one of the main reasons we are recalibrating our training is to replace renewed emphasis on naval integration. As Marines, our identity is inextricably linked with the Navy. It's at the core of who we are and what we do. But because of sustained operations ashore the last few years, that part of our identity it's been degraded. But we are first and foremost a naval combined arms expeditionary force, and we're strongest and most capable when we're integrated as part of that Navy Marine Corps team. So we're going to look at manning, training, and equipping and educating the force in our traditional role as soldiers from the sea. Now, part of this effort will include partnering with the Navy to revise our concept for naval campaigning and expeditionary ops. We're also working with the Navy to get more Marines aboard ships and realigning our waterfront and staff assignments with an eye to increase Navy Marine Corps staff integration. And talking with the CNO about this, we know we're not going to get any more people. We just want to make sure the people we have are in the right place doing the right job so that we have the right integration across the naval enterprise. And we'll seek to integrate our logistics and our C2 systems where it makes sense, increasing the speed and efficiency, hopefully, which we can support Marine, air, ground, and aviation forces afloat. I believe that tomorrow's fight has a high potential to be a naval fight, not a Navy fight, not a Marine fight, but a naval fight. Marines embarked aboard ships, fighting as a combined armed teams as part of a naval campaign. We've done this in the past as part of our history, and while we haven't had to do it recently, we need to be prepared, and I think the potential is there. Finally, we need to do what we do better. Not just better, but also, as I said, to do it differently. As we continue to develop and evolve Marine forces for operations in all 5 domains, we will aggressively experiment and test new concepts and capabilities. As you may know, we reached initial operational capability with our first F-35B squadron this past July, and they're flying out of Yuma. We're forming a 2nd squadron at the beginning of next year. The squadron is formed up now, is going to deploy to Iwakuni, Japan, in January of 2017. The Joint Strike Fighter is bringing some very significant capabilities to the fight, and we're going to push to develop even new operational concepts through experimentation, particularly relating to sensor fusion and electronic warfare. When we began fielding the MV-22 a few years ago, we didn't anticipate how revolutionary that platform would end up being. It challenged existing operational paradigms in a fundamental way, and we're still figuring out how to best take advantage of the capabilities of the Osprey, and I think you'll see the same thing with the F-35. So imagine this. It used to be the question was, where's the carrier, where's the ARG-MU? Then now the question is, where are the Ospreys? And then the next question is going to be, well, you mean you got this fifth generation aircraft that can penetrate in highly sophisticated integrated air defense and it's flying off an amphib ship? Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. So we don't know what we don't know, but we think there's a great utility there for the security of the nation. At the same time, we've got to balance the MAGTF, and we have to make sure that all portions of the MAGTF, the land piece, is also capable on the modern battlefield. So we're investing in our communications and our ground tactical vehicles. Now, our ground tactical vehicles, like many of our airframes, are old. The amphibious assault vehicle is over 40 years old. The LAV, the light armored vehicle, over 30. The average age of our M1A1 Abrams is 26 years old. And the bottom line is to maintain our tactical edge over potential adversaries, we have to modernize these vehicles. We can update and modernize legacy platforms to a certain degree, like we are with the amphibian assault vehicle, but we need new vehicles. We need the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, we need the amphibious combat vehicle, and we'll continue to pursue these and other cutting-edge technologies to enhance our capabilities, like unmanned systems, robotics, artificial intelligence, vehicle protection systems, 3D printing. These are all things that we're looking at and figuring out how, along with the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Joint, and SOCOM, and the joint community, on how we can best take advantage of these and fit them in to our concepts. So that's kind of what's in the Frago, and that's what we've been talking about and thinking about. There's a lot more questions out there, I'm sure, but I appreciate, again, the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you for listening to these remarks, and I look forward to your questions. All right. Where do you want me to go? You're going to sit there?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks for that. I know a lot of people have questions, so I'll start and then we'll open it up shortly. I wanted to just start with, you, I understand, did not really expect to have this job.
You've been talking to my wife.
What about this job has surprised you or is not what you expected?
That's a very difficult question to answer because, as you said, the fact that I'm here, there's no one more surprised about that, well, other than probably General Gallinetti and General Gregson, but I don't think I really understood the pressure, the expectation. I mean, I know, I come down every stairs. If you've been in the House of the Commandant, there's portraits of all the former. It's kind of creepy with all these guys looking at you when you're walking around. But when you walk down, get to the first floor, and you walk in the kitchen on the right, the last two are General Lew Wilson and General Robert Barrow, and those were the guys with the Commandant when I came in. And I remember sitting in the theater when they would walk in, and he would go, "Oh my God, that's the Commandant of the Marine Corps." And I feel like they're looking at me like, "Don't mess this up, Neller." So I mean, I don't think I really appreciated that. But I mean, I understand it, and people ask me if you're comfortable. I don't ever want to get comfortable in this job. There's too much counting on it. So my hope is that I can meet the measure of merit that those that have gone before, and do my very best, and leave the Marine Corps a better place than when I found it 40 years ago.
How much of your job is being a service chief, looking at the service, looking at the Marine Corps, and how much of it is the operational, strategic, military advice part of the service chief, other chiefs?
It's probably more the former than the latter. I mean, when we go to the tank and act as your rep as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, there's opportunities to provide your input. And General Dunford's been very good about that. But, you know, it's more, I'd say it's probably 60-40. At the same time, you know, you're reading the service stuff, but you're also looking at the other things. You read the intel to try to keep yourself appraised. I talked to a Marine colonel that's in charge of the Special Operations Task Force. He's a MARSOC guy, but he's a Marine. We used to serve together. So I talked to him the other day just to get some essay on what's going on and what he's doing up there, what his forces are doing, what's happening in Iraq and Syria.
Do you feel that you have to do things like that because there's a danger you kind of get in a bubble that you can get?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why you got to go, you know. There's a group of people that I know that I pick up the phone, or they're gonna pick up the phone and call me and say, "Did you really think about this? Is that what you meant? Or they're saying this." No, that's not what I meant. Well, then you got to change your message. It's not whatever you transmitted didn't get transmitted the way that you thought it got transmitted. So, you know, I think any commander at any level, you're always want to make sure you know the truth.
There's been quite a bit of talk and consternation in the Corps and outside of the Corps about the changes for women having combat roles. And I know you've spent a significant amount of time on this. Do you feel like this decision will be carried out without much of a problem? You know, your predecessor was you know, frank and candid about how his concerns about this. Do you feel like now that the decision has been taken, that the rank and file will understand that this has to happen regardless of the mixed feelings that preceded it?
You know, when Secretary Panetta made his decision in January 2013, the Marine Corps started out very quickly to look at, you know, what the potential ramifications were this. We assigned a number of female officers and staff NCOs in MOSs that they already held to previously restricted units. We started to send female Marines who volunteered through Infantry Training Battalion to see what their ability to complete the training. And then we formed a ground combat integrated task force with volunteers and got men and women and trained women in artillery and Amtracs and LAVs and tanks and infantry and engineers and did a evaluation of their ability to function, not just as individuals but in teams, in order to understand, you know, what this was all about. So it was based on the findings of that evaluation that General Dunford made his recommendation for an exception, and I supported that. So we have a decision. So we follow Marines. You know, one of our attributes is we follow orders, and so we're executing the plan. And we had developed a plan all along in parallel, based on the assumption that there probably would not be an exception. So we're going to move forward. And so there's a lot of things I don't know what I don't know. I have no doubt that we'll execute and we'll create an opportunities for every Marine to be successful. I mean, that's really what this is all about. The three lenses that we looked at this through was mission effectiveness and readiness, you know, health and welfare of the force of all the Marines, and talent management. We got great female Marines in the Marine Corps. And I've gone on record, and I want to increase the number of female Marines. I mean, I think there are some things about this decision there's no doubt in my mind, will make us better. Because before, say, you were excluded as a ground unit commander from having women in your unit in MOSs, any MOS. If the best communications officer in the division or the MEF was a woman, she couldn't be your commo. Now she can. So, but the ground combat is a different animal. So we'll find out when Secretary Carter approves our implementation plan, which he has not yet. Then we've got a 5-phase process. We'll go out, we'll set the conditions, we'll make sure that we do everything we can to set these Marines up for success. And at the same time, we're going to monitor all this stuff and report back. So I'm confident we'll have a successful implementation. I don't know what it will, and again, I'm not going to speculate as to what to do, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, we're going to go on the battlefield and we're going to win.
Is there a parallel to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal and the way that was created some controversy, but then once the decision was made, that was carried out successfully?
I think as far as the decision being made and it's being carried out, there's a parallel. I wouldn't equate, that was more of a, that was a lot more complicated. It was in many ways, it wasn't, I don't know, it was more complicated, it was just different. Mm-hmm. But those of us, or those that were concerned about that, for understandable reasons, there turned out to be, at least to this point, there was no concern. So that may turn out to be the same way with this.
What are you going to be looking for when the implementation moves forward? What are the key things you're going to be watching?
I'm going to look to see how many females are interested in doing this. I'm going to look to see how they do when they get to their unit. I'm going to look to see how they compete against other Marines as far as promotion. I'm going to look to see, we've never looked at this even for males in these units, and we have no idea. I mean, there's a huge physical, I know anecdotally and from personal experience what being an infantry person does to you over 10, 20, 30 years. We know that there's certain science about the physiology and biology of men and women, so how that'll all play out. And we're going to study that. We'll learn a lot. I think at the end of the day, it was mentioned, when you spend a year, you go to combat, at the end of the day in combat, you really, there's two types of Marines. There's those that can and those that can't. And those that can, whoever they are, you're really not interested. All right, let's go. Those that can't, you try to figure out a way to ensure that, that they're safe and they can contribute to the mission. And I've seen every type of human being that falls into both of those categories.
You talked about Back to the Future. I was intrigued by that. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the threat posed by Russia and China and comparing that to the much different kind of threat that's been the focus over the past 15 years with insurgents or militants with AK-47s and RPGs? It's a much different threat.
Well, it's more of a pure competitor, more of a traditional fight, although I don't think what either one, you're trying to presuppose or predict what the fight is going to be. But we're learning. We watch what the Russians have done in Ukraine. We're watching what they do now. We're watching what the Chinese do in their exercises and their training. But I think it's closer to what traditionally more of a military on a military, people in uniforms to some degree, fighting in a more conventional fight. Not conventional like we've seen it before, because it'll involve cyberspace, information, maneuver, attacking of the network. I mentioned that the friendly center of gravity to us as our people, I would say operationally, the friendly center of gravity of the U.S. force, the joint force, is the network. Everything we do is based on the network. If we got to protect the network, and we have to deny, and we know the enemy wants to deny us that, just as we want to deny our adversary access to the network. So how do you protect your portion of the network and deny them theirs? To keep precision. Think of all the stuff that we do that requires space-based, satellite-based communications, GPS, munitions, precision. If you were to lose that, what would that do to the way you thought you were going to fight? So that's the type of thing I think we have to practice. We have to unplug, all right? You can't get on, no more email. GPS doesn't work. Get out your map and your compass. I visited a unit in Afghanistan, and I flew out there, and the lieutenant drove out in his AMRAP, and we were short on time. I go, just get out your map and brief me on what's going on. He goes, well, I don't have a map. I can show you on the Blue Force tracker. And I was terrified. But to him, it was just like, Hey, this thing works. Here's the map. There's a map. You want to see a map, right, General? I said, yeah, but don't you have a map in your pocket? Like a paper thing with laminate? Do you have any grease pencils? And he looked at me like, no. So, okay. So the only people that are worried about maps generally are people over the age of 45. But I need to make people under the age of 25 worried about maps because I'm not sure, they're used to picking up their phone. I mean, it's things like phones. Fleet Forces Command realizes the Navy's out practicing, reducing their signature at sea. And they realize that whenever their sailors go out to check their Facebook page, they just gave away the position of the ship. So now you're going to have to search everybody before they embark and make sure they don't have their phone. Because anybody with a piece of software sitting at home on their iPad could track the ship. I mean, and we haven't worried about that.
Does that also mean that the profile of the Marine of the future is going to have to change or shift a bit, given this? You talked about the spectrum and these threats to the network.
I think that the people that we have that are working in those particular functional areas are going to have to increase. I mean, you're always going to have infantry, you're going to have artillery, you'll have aviation, you'll have logistics. But then the question is, how many people do you have do information warfare? How many people do you have electronic warfare? How many people do you have do psyops and deception? How many people do cyber? And as cyber capabilities get pushed down to a lower and lower level, at what level? I mean, how far we push communications down to lieutenants because they were stationary. Now they may not be stationary. We used to, if you couldn't carry it on your body or in your pack, you didn't bring it. So it's going to change if you're moving, and you're moving across the ground, which we haven't had to do a whole lot. I mean, people have moved, but they always came back to a base, as opposed to stop. Now I got to live on the ground. Fieldcraft, which is why I'm excited that there's Marines up in Norway having to survive. I mean, that's kind of the back to the future is kind of the way. When we came out of Vietnam, those are the guys that trained me. We always stop. You'd stop in broad daylight, and then we would move again. And you'd go, why are we doing that? He says, well, because they just saw you stop. So if we don't move again, you're going to get mortared. Okay, that makes sense to me. So those types of things we haven't, it's just, it's not difficult, but it's going to take some time to make people understand, actually dig in a position because, the enemy has indirect fire and they can see you and they can find you.
And you don't have perfect comms.
And you may not have perfect comms. And you may be, if your GPS isn't working, you're reading off a map again.
What about Europe? Do you see, there's this Black Sea rotational force. Mm-hmm. Do you see a bigger role for the Marine Corps in Europe? You see that expanding a bit?
Historically, we were not a large player. We had preposition equipment, which we still do in Norway, because that was a place we thought we could provide operational advantage to the Joint Force Commander in the warfight. The Army is, and I think properly in the right way, get repositioning, preposition equipment sets there and reassuring our allies and providing a deterrence. So we'll participate to the degree that we can, but it's more of a continental fight. We really need to maintain, we want to continue to operate as part of the naval force and use sea as a maneuver space to provide a threat to any adversary coming from the sea.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about how you see the future fight likely to be a naval fight?
Well, I think the ability to move as part of a naval force, when I say naval force, I'm talking about all the warfare, composite warfare commands of the Navy, submarines, carriers, strike, amphibious, and to actually be able to project power ashore to as our mission, seize and secure advanced naval bases, secure choke points, deny the enemy or the adversary certain pieces of key terrain, interdict their movement on the sea. And so I think there are a lot of scenarios, and there are scenarios in contingency planning today where we're an amphibious force. And you hear a lot, well, when was the last time you did an amphibious landing? Well, if amphibious is coming from the sea and going ashore, we've done it hundreds and hundreds of times over the past couple decades. Whether it's to do humanitarian assistance, whether it's to secure, reinforce, or evacuate people from an embassy, or it's just to put forces ashore. Whether it was Task Force 51 at the beginning of OEF with General Mattis, we put the MEU ashore in Afghanistan a number of times, just as we've put the MEU ashore in Iraq a number of times. So I think the potential for that, maybe a larger force, a brigade, is there in the future. You could come up with a number of scenarios that, using the number of countries that we're concerned about today.
I understand you're a fan of the book Ghost Fleet.
I am.
So why is that?
I don't know. I've always read Clancy and Dale Brown. I think Dale Brown, he's an Air Force guy, wrote Flight of the Old Dog was his first book. I think he's a prophet, really. I mean, a lot of stuff, if you read his books about unmanned systems and space-based communications and all the stuff and special operations forces, and it's all either has come true or it's going to come true. I think Ghost Fleet, I think the two authors just kind of put in a future somewhat feasible, understandable context, maybe not the politics, but just the systems and the things that were used, whether they're unmanned systems, the potential vulnerabilities of the way we're building the force today that we need to be watchful about, even stuff about physical endurance being altered by medicants and things like that. I mean, there's so much going on in the medical world as far as neuroscience and DNA mapping, and I mean it's exciting, but it's terrifying at the same time. But so I just think it was a kind of open your, if you haven't been thinking about this, and I know many people have, but if you haven't, you like kind of open up the aperture and make you realize that the future is here. It's not 5, 10, 15 years from now. It's tomorrow. It's yesterday. Much of this stuff.
One last question, then we'll open it up. Could you talk about, I don't want to stop without at least asking you about the state of the war at the moment against Islamic State. I know it's been upsetting for some Marines to see what's happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, in places where people fought and died to push back sort of the predecessor of Islamic State in some ways. Do you think it's legitimate to propose or to seriously consider a larger U.S. footprint to try to take on this threat?
I think, that's a policy decision, and I think, there's military advice out there, and the commander-in-chief will make a decision. But at the end of the day, could we do it? Sure. But, that's not really going to solve the problem. We know the real problem is if a coalition or a U.S.-supported coalition force goes in and establishes a security environment, there's got to be a political solution. There's got to be somebody to give it to. I think we knew when we left Anbar in 2011 that our biggest concern was that the Iraqi government was going to properly take care of the people of Anbar because of the politics and then the religious divide that exists, this sectarian divide between Sunni and Shia, and that's exactly what happened. So we already went in and did it once. I think they've got to do it this time. I think we can help them. I think there's things that we're doing, continue to help them. But at the end of the day, even they will be successful. There's no doubt in my mind in Iraq. The Iraqis will eventually restore their territory. Syria is a little more complicated, but there's got to be belief by the people that live in those areas that their government is going to provide them with basic services and treat them equitably and fairly compared to the rest of the population. So that's not a good answer, but but I think that's part of the calculus. Whatever we do, whether it's a safe zone, a no-fly zone, whether we submit conventional forces, if that other part isn't there, then you're not going to get to the end state that you have to do. So then you have to ask yourself the question, why would I do that?
Open to questions here. And I know I didn't get to the budget because I knew everyone here would. Go ahead.
Good morning, General. Otto Kreischer with Sea Power Magazine. You've got a lot of personnel issues coming up. Your MAGTFs and your special personnel MAGTFs are very busy, but you've got more demands on cyber. You're going to build your cyber command, and you've now got a new focus on information warfare, which is going to require a different amount of people. Are you going to be faced with a situation that you're going to have to cut some of your operational forces, infantry battalions and those sort of things, in order to man cyber and information warfare?
Well, the simple answer is potentially yes. And I said that I'm willing to take risk in the units that we have now. So once we determine what are the capabilities we need and what are the types of Marines that we need to do that, those are not going to be PFCs and Lance Corporals over time. So once we determine what it is, so you have one or two choices. You can ask for an end strength increase to grow the force in a different way. Or you can take people that you have doing one thing now and remission them to do something else, or a combination thereof. So we don't know yet, what that number is. I mean, there's a lot of speculation. I'll probably know that by this summer, and then it'll take a period of time. But I believe that we're going to make the change, and hopefully we'll get into this 80% ring as far as the right numbers and the right capabilities, and it'll take us a while. I mean, it takes 22 years to grow a colonel. So if we have to take structure, we'll probably take it from the more junior Marines, because those are the more easy to, we can replace them. I mean, just because they're younger but right now, a cyber Marine, it's a 2-year pipeline, and we're in the process of growing our cyber capability. And the course that they have to go through is got a high attrition rate. So we have to remission those people. So, I mean, that's part of this talent management and the future force that Dr. Carter's working on. We're looking at our reserves. Like right now in our reserve component, there's a lot of, one of the great advantages of reserves is they have a civilian life. And many of them do this for real. So now we're going out and finding out who they are and trying to figure out how to get them involved in this stuff, because now we're already skipped 5, 10, 15 years of development because somebody owns a cyber protection company and we put them right in there. And then there's also civilian hires. So the answer to your question is yes, we're willing to do that, and we're just trying to figure out what the bill is and where we're going to take it from.
It's over here.
General, hi, I'm Harlan Ullman with the Atlantic Council. Thank you for your very thoughtful remarks. I have a broader question. My sense, and this has been an unsuccessful argument on my part, is that the largest danger the Department of Defense faces is inherent uncontrollable cost growth, worse than the Soviet Union or the Russians or the Chinese or so forth, which is growing about 5 to 7% a year for everything from people to precision weapons to pencils. Now, when you discuss this with the senior leadership, you get kind of a nod yes, but I really don't see any real action taken for the long term to address this, because it seems to me, unless this internal cost growth is really dealt with now, we're facing the prospect of a variant of the hollow force that ensued after Vietnam. And I wonder what your reaction is, first, to the dangers of this cost growth and how you see the senior leadership responding to it in the Pentagon.
There's been a lot of discussion. I mean, they just take the cost of people. And so the new retirement plan that'll start in 2018 is supposed to buy down some of that cost. There's, differences in what medical coverage and things like that to reduce the cost. Whether that's going to be enough or not remain to be seen. I mean, the retirement system, if it makes the savings, but there may be some unintended consequences of that, because now someone who gets to the 10-year mark, before they were kind of at the decision point, but now they have a different decision because they're vested in a 401k type retirement, so they actually could leave. So I have some concerns that might be an unintended consequence. So it saved us money, but then, I mean, the people that make the military run are chief petty officers and gunnery sergeants and sergeant first classes and senior captains and majors and lieutenant colonels. I mean, they actually do work. Okay, I make people do work. They get stuff done. And so we have to keep that core, and not that I don't want them to have an option, and not that I want them to be able to not have anything if they get out, but I want them to stay. And so, yeah, there is concern. I have concerns. I mean, the gear we have is expensive. It's expensive to maintain. But if we don't have that gear, it doesn't give us the capability we need because our potential adversaries are increasing their capability. So there's always going to be a trade. If you look at the cost growth over time, it's for inflation, it's pretty flat. But, we'll give you an example. Facilities. This is probably the best. If I look at the institution and the facilities that we have today, it's probably as good as I've ever seen. After coming in 1975, the facilities were there were a lot of World War II, post-World War II. We haven't gotten rid of all of that, but now we got all new stuff. Now the problem is, I got all this new stuff. I want it to stay new. So it costs me money. It costs money to build it. Now I got to spend money to sustain it. So all these puts and takes and all this stuff is all out there. And for us, we get part of our money from the Department of the Navy for our aviation. The Marine Corps budget's around $24 billion. About 70% of that goes to pay for people. And that's with a force that's 60% of us under the age of 25. With one officer for every 9.5 enlisted Marines. So we're relatively inexpensive personnel-wise, but yet that's where our money goes. So I share your concern. I don't know enough about all the different things. I'm pretty confident, though, that most of us came in when we had the quote-unquote hollow force, when it wasn't just we didn't have good gear and the gear was worn out and it wasn't maintainable, but we didn't have good people. I think the first thing you would see if the force got to be hollow is the people won't stay. So we watch that very closely. I mean, that's kind of the metric that I use to watch, where we are, what everybody's thinking is, because they'll tell you if the gear is not maintainable, if they're not getting to fly enough, if they're not getting to train enough. They join to do stuff. I mean, they join to go places and test themselves, and so we've got to continue to be able to support that. So I'm not going to wish it away, and you're right, but as far as specifically what we're going to do about it, I think there's been some measures taken. There could be more, but then there's other factors into that calculus that are going to have to be weighed. I mean, there's some big bills out there, like the nuclear business, submarines, bombers. I mean, it makes the Marine Corps money look like really small. So I watch that too because it's a big bill. I'm not sure I answer your question, but I take your point, and I'm learning more about it every day, and I watch it closely.
Sorry, you want this gentleman in the back here, in the glasses.
Yes, General. I'm Russell King, a retired federal employee. A few decades ago, we used to have a male-only draft, and I've heard that there's a possibility in the future we could have a draft which includes women who could involuntarily go into combat positions. But I'm wondering, presuming the Marines, if there were a future draft, presuming the Marines got their quotas, would they be able have the ability to refuse draftees on that basis, on the current conditions?
You know, I have no idea. I got asked the question the other day at a hearing, and do I believe that based on the change in the policy on there being no more restriction excluding women from certain units and MOSs, should they be required to register for the draft? And I simply said, based on my reading of the law, and my very rudimentary reading of the law, because the law said they didn't have to register because they were excluded, now that they're not, that it was logical to me that they should. Now, whether the Marine Corps will not have to accept draftees, I think we did, and I'm looking at General Gregson and General Gallané, I think we did in Vietnam. You know, I think it was like one Army, 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 Marine, you know, and everybody's trying to change their position in line to become number 4, of course. But if we did that, I mean, we really haven't thought about that. You know, as far as what Marines do and where they go, you know, we want to put people, one, where we think they can provide the best talent and capability for the force, and two, where they want to go. You know, I really, you know, we need to do a better job on the first one, and if the first one and the second one line up, that's a really good thing. So I think as this discussion was taking place on the removal of the exclusion, this argument, I've really been kind of surprised as to why this has spiked up. I thought people would spend a little more time talking about or reflecting on the implications of the decision as it was made as opposed to the draft. But that's, you know, it'll have to be debated, and I'm sure there'll be a court case. And again, when the court makes the decision, then the government will do what they do, and the Marine Corps will do what they're told.
Just one last question, this gentleman.
Hi, good morning, General. I'm Alex Sanchez from the Center for International Maritime Security. Last year, 250 Marines from the 2nd Expeditionary Force and the 8th Engineer Support Battalion in North Carolina went to Central America for training, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador for some jungle training. I'm wondering if you have talked to Admiral Kidd, the new commander of SOUTHCOM, or the commander of Marine South, about continuing these kind of initiatives in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you.
We did send a group of Marines built around the Engineer Support Battalion. They went based out of Sotocano, Honduras. There will be another group that will go this summer during, kind of tied to the destructive weather season in that part of the world. There'll be a reserve infantry regiment, and they'll form the command element, and there'll be about 250 Marines, and they'll go down there and do similar things. They'll do theater security cooperation with other militaries in the region. They'll be able to provide some level of potential humanitarian assistance if there's a hurricane or some other natural disaster. They'll stay down there for 6 months during the rest of the year, and we believe we have the funding and the wherewithal to continue to do that in order to support Commander Southcom's military strategy down there. So there's a lot of Marine Corps, naval infantry units throughout Central and South America, so we always want to stay close with our family down there, and we work with them and other militaries. And so the answer to your question, yes, we're going to go back this year, and we'll continue to try to go back as long as we've got the resources.
All right, well, thank you for this. Really appreciate your being so generous with your time. And I have a cousin who's a Marine, and so I hope I didn't let the family down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.